Hello, welcome to the Sports Philanthropy podcast. I am your host, Roy Kessel, and today we are very excited to have with us two special guests. We have Karen Doubilet from Tel Aviv, who is the Global Executive Director of Peace Players, and we have Sally Namani, who is in Brooklyn and is the U.S. Director of Programming and Partnerships. So Karen and Sally, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Roy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I know you guys are doing incredible work now spanning the globe and starting in the Middle East. And so love to get more of the background, but at the start, I really want to hear a little bit more about each of you. So why don't we start with Karen and have you give us some of your background and what drew you, through your education and experience to get involved with an organization like Peace Players.
Sure, thanks, Roy. So I was probably one of the first people involved in Peace Players that actually wasn't an athlete, not an athlete myself. And I actually came to this work through peace building. So when I met Peace Players, I was doing my doctorate in conflict management. And I was doing research on the impact of programs like Peace Players, not only that use sports, but other tools to bring children and youth together across divides to kind of build relationships and to, transform conflict. And as a part of my research, I was looking at a few different programs. I met an American man named Matt Minoff who had come over here to play. He had actually played at Yale in the US and then was recruited over here to play professionally. And he decided, along with Brendan and Sean Toohey, the two brothers that founded Peace Players, that this would be a good opportunity for them to kind of pilot Peace Players in the Middle East. And he was very wise to kind of look for someone with expertise in peace education and conflict resolution, because as I said, it was an organization primarily of athletes and basketball players. He found me. It sort of recruited me on, and life has never been the same since. I completely did a complete 180, left academia, and I've been with Peace Players for 15 years now.
So you've really seen it grow up as an organization right from the outset, and I think that will lead to some interesting things. So I want to give Sally a chance to jump in, and then we can talk a little bit more about the history of Peace Players. So Sally, give us a little bit of your background. Especially, I'm interested to hear what got you excited about sports when you were young. What drew you to sports?
So I was one of those kids who was just super active. I was born in Nigeria, and my brother, in the neighborhood where we lived growing up, my parents didn't really let us play outside. So my brother and I used to just tear up the house, playing soccer in the living room. And I was just super active. Anything that involved sport or playing, I wanted to be a part of it. And my brother would always bring me along. And so, just watching TV and cable back home, we would always see highlights of the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. And I always just thought basketball was such a cool sport, basketball and tennis especially. But soccer was more common back home, and it was a sport that most kids played. But a lot of girls didn't play sports back then. Gender roles are very much rigid back home, and the sport and youth sports infrastructure just didn't really exist in the 90s. And it's starting to develop now, but in the 90s it was barely there. And so my brother happened to be my sports partner, and he introduced me to basketball later on when I was about 12, 13 years old. And I just really fell in love with playing the game. And so when we moved to the US, basketball kind of just became my way of making new friends, was my way of socializing in a new town that I lived in. And it's funny because growing up, we didn't really know a lot of about opportunities that exist to work in sports. And so I didn't really have aspirations to work in sports. Outside of basketball, I'm very much like a history nerd. I love watching like history documentaries, and I had aspirations to go into political science and like the international relations field. And following undergrad, I went to grad school right away. I went to the New School in New York City for international development, and I did a year-long internship at the United Nations. I was working closely with the International Chamber of Commerce and supporting the representative of the International Chamber of Commerce at the UN and lobbying for private sector interest at the United Nations. And very quickly, I recognized that as much as I enjoyed macro policy and being able to influence how policy materializes on the ground, I wanted to be closer to working at the community level. Like one thing about playing sports is that you get so used to just being around people and building with people and meeting new people. And I wanted to be in that space, and sports just being my element, I started looking for ways to get back involved in the sports space after having played in high school and also in college as well. And so I learned about Peace Players through a lady named Beth Eisen. And she connected me with Matt Geschke, who's currently at Nike, who are one of our key national partners in the US. And the more I learned about Peace Players, the more I wanted to get involved with the organization. And so I joined in 2015 as an international fellow in Northern Ireland, and I've been here ever since, and I've taken on different roles. And I'm just really excited about the opportunity for our work, especially here in the US.
So I want to throw it back to Karen for a minute. There's going to be plenty for everybody to discuss. I think this could be a 2-hour episode, but I want to go back to the beginning of Peace Players. When you look at that first year or two, I know we have so many organizations in our network that are new, that are launching and trying to understand. As you look back on that, what did you find was the most challenging aspects of getting a new organization up and running?
I mean, I think one of the more challenging aspects is that I think initiatives like, or organizations like Peace Players are often started by visionaries, you know, with a lot of passion and great ideas. And I think one of the challenges in starting something new with people who are really motivated and passionate and excited is not moving too fast. So, you know, when I came in, I started in 2006. The Middle East branch was actually established in 2005. And essentially, you know, like I said, there was a bunch of American basketball players who came out here just to kind of start it up. And you kind of needed that, almost that cowboy mentality, I think, to do something so incredible and so visionary, especially in a place like the Middle East. So on the one hand, you know, it was probably necessary to do it that way. At the same time, of course, you know, it was moving quickly. There was a lot of mistakes made. I think one thing that Peace Players learned really, really quickly, that one of the key things to having a successful and impactful program is really, when you're working globally, is really around the local ownership. So really about finding the right people from the very communities that you work in who are going to lead the programs, because they're the ones who really know their communities best. They're the ones that, you know, the parents and the youth are going to be more likely to trust. And ultimately, they're the stakeholders in the particular, in this case, in the conflict that we're dealing with. So I think, you know, it's always that push and pull and the balance between doing proper due diligence and really working slowly and making sure you do things right, but also, you know, with the right amount of kind of passion, vision, and a little bit of risk taking.
It's interesting the way you describe that, because it's really very similar to entrepreneurs in any startup business, where you have that mentality of sort of fail fast, right? If you go, just keep moving ahead. If you're going to go the wrong direction, just figure it out quickly, because you've got to keep moving forward. And I think it's a little bit different in the space you're talking about, especially with the topic that you're talking about, because if you're dealing with the peace and bringing people together, and you have what we'll call, for lack of a better term, failures, and therefore people are really concerned about getting together again to go through some of that programming. And so I think you've got a different level of commitment that's needed to, as you say, do the due diligence and vet the process to make sure that the programming element is solid before that's launched. You can be running ahead with the organizational structure and trying to build out some of the other capacity building elements or fundraising elements, and you don't have that same risk. But where you sit, I think that there's a great risk if that programming fails.
Yeah, I mean, we have a great responsibility, right? It's, as you allude to, it's in the kind of environments that we're working in, it's also possible to bring people together and to have a negative impact on their perceptions of one another and their relationships. So it is really important. I think something that Peace Players did realize early on, that you need to really rely on research. You need to rely on, you know, models that and factors that we know are critical to success, and make sure that you're thinking about those things all the time.
I know that the other challenge from the startup mode is how you identify the type of people that you want to grow with. And so you've been there since 2006. So you've been going now 15 years in that capacity, and you've seen a lot of growth and a lot of development. Tell us a little bit about the size of Peace Players, how many people are involved, and then how you look to expand the programming.
Sure. So, you know, over the past, we're just hitting our 20th anniversary. And we've reached over the past 20 years about 150,000 young people. We work globally. We're in the United States, we're in the Middle East, Cyprus, South Africa. I missed one, right, Sally? Northern Ireland. There you go. We recently piloted a project in Rwanda, and we're considering whether we're trying to figure out exactly what that relationship is going to look like, but we're really excited about that. In terms of our growth, what we're really looking at now is the next evolution of Peace Players, and that's two main projects. One is our Leadership Academy, and this kind of relates to the point that I was talking about before. Our model, one of the main, you know, factors that we feel is really important for success is the leadership pipeline. And the leadership pipeline is a model whereby the kids in our program become the coaches and the mentors and the facilitators of the younger generation. And that's been key to kind of getting the right people on board who have a triple threat and, you know, eat, breathe, and sleep Peace Players values. So kind of the next evolution of that leadership pipeline is what we're calling a Leadership Academy. And it's an initiative that's really focused around our alumni. So those who grew up in the program, they may already be coaches or facilitators, and really supporting them in the next steps of their lives, in their professions, in their education, to support them with, you know, internships, fellowships, scholarships, trainings, connecting our alumni globally over the long term. So this is the Leadership Academy is an initiative that we're just building right now. So I can't give you all the details. It's actually being, the strategic plan is being built by a youth-led steering committee. So we've identified 2 young leaders, alumni in each of our sites, and they've established a steering committee, and they're working over the next few months to build the strategic plan. So if you ask me in the fall, I'll have a lot more details about that, but it's really exciting, and we really see that as the way of deepening our impact, helping to position our alumni, you know, as they grow into professionals, into positions where they can really influence change. And the second initiative is SPN, our Sports Peace Innovation Network, which is essentially our technical assistance arm, in which we take our best practices, and we train other organizations, in various facets of sport for development. And that is a project, in fact, our sort of partnership in Rwanda now, it sort of came out of a SPN project. And over the next 3 years, we're really looking to build a strategic plan for SPN and to really grow that. So it's a way of us expanding our reach, both in depth and in quantity, but without starting a whole site, a country site. So a way for us to spread all of our learnings and to kind of help other organizations and bring them into our network and into our movement.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. I really love the fact that your strategic planning committee for the Leadership Academy is basically being led by youth, and that they're taking ownership and control, and that you're encouraging, not only allowing it, but encouraging that and really creating that as the model, because so often we see adults kind of creating programming and then turning around to the kids and go, this is what you're going to do. This is what you need to do. And it's a different style of communication. I think if you look today at how kids interact and communicate, I remember growing up, right? You had a phone. You didn't know who's calling. The phone rings, you answer the phone. Now, my kids, everybody walks around with the phone, but nobody talks on the phone, right? My kids are never on the phone talking to anybody. They might be talking to them on Xbox. They might be on FaceTime or on Zoom or something else, but they're never on the phone. So it's interesting to see how that technology evolved. And then the SPN program that you described, I think, is critical, because one of the things we've seen in our network is how important it is to have organizations really take the challenge of leading that change, and the ones that have been successful, creating an opportunity for other people to leverage off of the work that they've done, instead of having 25 organizations that are essentially trying to create the same type of curriculum and program that you have. We see too frequently that has been the history in this space, in this sector of sports philanthropy, where somebody will try and go off and do it on their own because they don't know where to find it. And so they end up spending more time, more money, and often come up with an inferior product because they're not experts. They might say, I know I need a piece type of program, but I don't really know what that looks like. And so they're going to try and develop it from scratch without the 15 or 20 years of experience that you bring to the table. So I want to jump across to Sally now, because I'm really interested. You talked about growing up in Nigeria and then doing work in Northern Ireland. So certainly you've seen a few of the different markets in which Peace Players operates. What I'm curious is, you talked about your background with the internship at the UN and the macro policy and everything that you were doing. What drew you to wanting to be back at the grassroots type of level instead of looking at that macro policy?
So, growing up as athletes, sometimes we don't recognize in real time how much just being involved in sports and the impact that it has on the lives of young people, especially young women. Having the privilege of playing basketball from middle school all the way through college, there were just a lot of tangible skills that I was developing as a result of being an athlete, from being finding my leadership style and feeling comfortable in it, being able to influence and persuade a group of people, and just being on a winning team, being able to win, and the ability to bring people together around a common cause. It's just really strong skills that we learn during our time as athletes. And I wasn't really during my playing days, I wasn't thinking about it from that perspective. But after graduating college and going to grad school, I just really missed being around sports. And at that time, really recognized that sports was my element. And I started, researching, what are opportunities that exist in the international relations space within sports and being able to be in this industry, but operating from within the sports space. And so while interning at the International Chamber of Commerce and working closely with the UN, I just, I had a great experience there in that I was exposed to a large institution that has a wide global reach and just a number of initiatives around the world that's really dedicated to improving the lives of people. But I was missing that being able to have that human connection that sports has a way of bringing to whatever space that you're in and you're participating in sports. And also just being a woman of color as well. I recognize just how much sport has opened doors for me as well. And I wanted to be able to do that for other young people. And even before I got involved with Peace Players, I worked with a local organization in New York City called Power Play NYC. And their mission is really around creating sport and opportunities for young girls in the inner city or in underserved communities in New York City, and also providing like career readiness opportunities for those young girls. And during that time, as much as I was a coach and a coordinator at that organization, I also felt like I was a beneficiary of being involved in Power Play. And so the more I was, seeing those direct individual relationships with the young people that I was coaching and seeing the influence I was having on them just by being who I am, a woman of color who played sports, and how much they looked up to me, it influenced me and encouraged me to want to pursue a career in this space, to be in a space where I can create opportunities for young people to have that social mobility that sports provides, but also that unifying spirit that sports has a way of bringing into communities. And I didn't express this, I didn't share this at the start, but I spent the last 2-3 years before joining this role working as our Brooklyn director. So I've been very much immersed in like the community building, the grassroots aspect of it. And by nature, I am a builder. I like being around, starting something from scratch and watching it grow. And being involved with Peace Players, both in Northern Ireland and in the US, has been really rewarding in that as much as Peace Players is one of the older organizations in this space, and we've had a lot of success and challenges as well, there are opportunities for all of our staff, regardless of what your title is, to really have ownership around programming. When I was in Northern Ireland, I worked mostly in South Belfast, but I was also involved in starting up new programs in the Mid Ulster, which is like the rural parts of Northern Ireland. And I loved having ownership around that work. And so we really live into our culture of collaboration, and that our team and staff members, from international fellows to Karen, who's our executive director, to Brendan, like everyone is involved in some facet of the organization and really having ownership on how we've been able to grow in the last few years. And that's something that having that in an organization is just really special. And it also just increases buy-in, innovation, and just the creativity that continues to make Peace Players such a strong organization.
Well, I think that buy-in that you're talking about, right, and that ownership of what the program is, the successful organizations really do a great job of making everybody in the organization be part of that process. It's very hard to create a successful organization, especially as dispersed as you are. And that's something I wanted to hear. Maybe you can share with our listeners a little bit more about the structure of Peace Players. How many people do you have on the ground in the different countries between Israel, the US, and the other countries that you're currently serving?
Karen, did you want to take that, or I'm happy to take that question as well. Okay, so we have a global support team, right? So actually we have 5 sites in the United States, Northern Ireland, Cyprus, South Africa, and the Middle East. And in each of those sites, we have a local team led by folks who are from those countries, who understand the context, who are building out the programs there. And then we have a global support team that supports these or adds to the capacity of these local teams. And that global support team includes Karen, includes our HR and finance folks. We also have our Marcoms, global Marcoms team as well, that provide additional capacity, fundraising capacity as well to each of our sites in the different countries. In the US as well, with us being so dispersed, we also have a national support team. So we have our local teams in Baltimore, Brooklyn, LA, Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore. I keep feeling like I'm missing a city, but we also have a national support team that provides additional capacity around fundraising, strategic planning, HR as well, and just having that additional team that's supporting the local teams on the ground has been a really helpful model to us, in that we have folks who are on the ground, who are from the community, who know the community, who are building those relationships on the ground. But we also have a national support team who are there to support around things like fundraising and marketing and communications, and having that unifying thread that kind of unites peace players across the board. Karen, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sally summed it up pretty well. So it's really, like a hub and spoke model, where our global support team is the hub, and we're sort of a center for best practices, center of excellence, that's disseminating the best practices and providing support to the sites, as well as hopefully unlocking some, unrestricted sources of funding. I hope something that's unique about the way that we work, something that we were lucky that we pivoted to this prior to COVID, and it was actually the new infrastructure. It served COVID times very well, but we essentially, about a year and a half ago, created a global collaborative infrastructure where each function of our organization is driven by a team that the member of the global support team who oversees that function is in charge of. And each global team has representatives from all of our sites. And so it's a way to really hear and address the needs of everybody and kind of collaborate, and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So this was something that we had actually set up prior to COVID, obviously completely unaware that we were about to head into this global pandemic. I think the fact that we had that infrastructure set up already was helpful, because, of course, we had the same Zoom fatigue challenges and everything as everyone else, but at least we had already set up these kind of global teams and committees. And the fact that everybody was doing everything virtually and online, it fit really well to that structure. So it's really enabled us over the past year to lean into that and to do a lot more collaborative work than probably we would have gotten done if we were, all living our normal lives and running regular programming. But we really see ourselves as a global movement, and, culture of collaboration is one of our core values. And we really, more so, I'd say over the past year and a half, have really been living into that.
You touched on a few interesting points, which is, given the geographic dispersion, creating that infrastructure is crucial, because how many total people do you have involved in Peace Players, including your on-site staff in all of the different countries?
I believe we have about 60 full-time staff. And then, of course, a lot of sessional coaches or consultants and people that work for us that aren't necessarily on the payroll.
So that's a big operation, and managing that communication. And you raised another interesting point when you both talked about the global support and the elements of fundraising. And it's interesting because the fundraising regulations and restrictions are very different as you go across all of the different countries, right? The US has much more probably, distinct and strict regulations, I think, than from what I've heard. Maybe not, maybe you're finding it different in other countries.
I think the US, I would say, is definitely has the greatest culture of philanthropy. I have not seen anything like the culture of philanthropy in the US anywhere else. Countries like Israel are actually much stricter than the US. There's quite a few countries that we work in are actually stricter in terms of their regulations. But there's a lot less funding coming from those countries. So it's kind of like ironic, I don't know why, but
So when you say
yeah.
stricter, in what sense?
So in Israel, for example, you need to report to the government annually on all of your earmarked donations to the point of being to the minutia. So any funds that you receive that were earmarked for anything, you're doing a very detailed financial report, not for the donor. I mean, you probably have to do that for the donor as well, but you're doing that for the kind of registrar for nonprofits. And each year in Israel, you need to have after you do your, annual financial report and all that, you submit it to the registrar, and then they need to issue you sort of like a certificate of good standing, and that's annual. And if most local foundations would ask for that certificate in order to, that you would be eligible. So it's a little bit more detailed. And there's also, depending on the country, some countries have or just kind of more regulations around funding that comes in from foreign entities. So, there's oftentimes extra reporting there. But yeah, I mean, the peace building sphere, I think, can oftentimes be a little bit more complicated when we're using sport for peace building, because local governments sometimes look at, these projects as potentially being foreign interference. So I think for that reason, there's kind of more suspicion and more regulations around it.
Yeah, so that extra scrutiny that you're talking about, as you said, it's really due to the fact that you, in reality or not, right, are perceived as an outsider coming in and trying to influence what might be going on in a local community. So from a fundraising,
if the funding comes from abroad, yeah.
What's that?
If the funding comes from abroad, especially if it's governmental funding that comes from abroad, also depends which government, but.
Right. So as you look at the different sites in which you operate, then is most of the funding being raised by peace players, and we'll call it in a global sense, maybe from the US market and then being deployed in these other markets, or are you raising funds as well in Northern Ireland, in Israel, in Africa?
So it's both. Like, as I said, the US is by far, the greatest source of funding for our organization, although all of our sites are very much encouraged and almost, required in a collaborative sense to really be working on their local financial sustainability. So that might mean in some cases, if you look at our Middle East, for example, the Middle East is completely funded by earmarked funding. So funds that are restricted toward the Middle East. But almost all of those funds come from the US. So, when we talk about a program being locally funded, we're really talking about that the funds are restricted toward that specific site or program, right? Rather than being like unrestricted funding. So absolutely all the sites need to be always thinking about their local financial sustainability and how they're raising money, whether it comes from the US or Northern Ireland or South Africa or wherever it comes from. And then we're kind of doing, obviously when you're fundraising, the best kinds of funding to receive is when it's unrestricted and you can use it for whatever you want. So that's obviously ideal. And you know, any funds that we raise globally that are unrestricted are then divvied up to the sites, depending on their need, depending on, you know, how much of their budget has been funded in that particular year and so on.
So I want to jump over to Sally now. I think that the fundraising is always a challenge for every group, and when you're doing it across different countries and continents, I'm sure it gets even more challenging. So Sally, as you deal with the partnerships in the U.S., talk a little bit about what kind of partnerships you're looking for.
Yeah, so I can speak a bit more to like my role in supporting our directors locally and building our local partnerships. And you know, Karen talked a bit like that collaborative culture that we have at Peace Players and how we work across the board on our national team and parts of our global support team as well, in identifying potential partnerships that we want to explore at the national level. So, you know, locally, part of our model is really investing in local leadership and local stakeholders. So our programs in each of our cities in the US is really invested in building out strong partnerships at the community level with like-minded organizations who also share the same values as we do. One of the things that has made Peace Players really successful in the US and globally as well is we learned this from our, with you know what Karen shared earlier with at the early stages of Peace Players, is that it's really important that as we're building out these programs to engage the local stakeholders as early as possible and really building out a program that is immersed in the local ecosystem of sports-based youth development programming in the cities that we work. So from the community centers to the schools, to the other organizations who are working in the neighborhoods of the communities where we work, really thinking about win-win partnerships that elevates the work that we're building out, and the work that the mission that or the vision that we have for our programs in our cities, while also elevating, creating partnerships that are elevating all of those organizations work and all of those stakeholders work as well. So I can speak a bit about the experience in Brooklyn. We work very closely with an organization called University, and it's based in Brownsville. University is essentially a hub of local artists, activists, urban farmers who are involved in the revitalization of the Brownsville community in different capacities. And so partnering with University, we've been able to tap into some of their facilitators who have been able to come in and help run programming for our Brownsville youth, and really being able to elevate the work they're doing, while of course improving and adding to the quality of the experience of our program as well. We've been able to create similar partnerships in other cities. For example, we work very closely with the Detroit Pistons, where we host community conversations around issues that are facing the Detroit community. So the Pistons, being one of our key partners in that city, we've been able to leverage their influence and bringing our expertise to that space. I explore conversations like mentorship opportunities for young people in the city of Detroit. Also in June, at the height of the protests, how can we collectively create space where leaders from the nonprofit, for-profit, and also the law enforcement space can have an honest conversation on how we can create opportunities for Detroit communities to thrive. At the national level, Nike is our key national partner and just really align with us in terms of our values as an organization and the vision that we have for the work that we're doing in the United States. Other partnerships that we're exploring at that national level, our goal is that they'll align with what we currently have with Nike, and that we share similar values. They are thought partners with us. We've been able to influence some of the initiatives that they've put out recently, and they've also been able to influence and challenge us as we think about our programs in the US. So when we think of partnerships at the national level, we want to engage partners at that scale who are deeply invested in the work that we're doing. So we're not looking for like short-term one-off partnerships. We're looking for people who can really build with us and think about the impact, how we can maximize our impact as a collective on a long-term basis at a deepened level as well. So partnerships that we explore at that level is very much, we're looking for large-scale, deepened investment and really invested in this leadership pipeline that Karen talked about earlier that we're looking to develop, not just here in the US, but globally as well. Our vision is this network of young leaders, coaches, community leaders who are, through their passion for sports, are really advocating for a more peaceful, equitable, and inclusive world. And so we also approach our partnerships in that way. And then we're looking for partners who are deeply invested in the vision that we're looking to build, and who will look to create something that's long-term and not so much like one-off partnerships. And Nike has just been a great model for that. And we're looking to explore in the future partnerships at that scale.
Well, I want to congratulate both of you. You're doing an amazing job, I think, using sports as a way to break down these barriers, both locally and internationally, is really important. And I know that you've had a lot of great success. Why don't you share with people the best way for them to reach you or find more information about Peace Players?
Sure. So I think, I think the best place is probably our website, which is also constantly evolving and of course being revamped right now. So it'll look better in a few months, but all the information is there, our contact details, bios, information about our programs, reports. So feel free. And then of course, social media, look for us on Instagram, Facebook, and did I miss any? LinkedIn.
Well, again, congratulations on everything you're doing. So I want to kind of do a little curveball at the end here as we talk about what's going on based on what you've seen. Well, we'll start with Sally here in terms of, we're going to use our superpowers, our sports philanthropy superpowers, and we're going to appoint you as commissioner of one of the sports. So tell us what sport you would choose.
I think basketball will be the obvious answer, but my second favorite sport is actually tennis. Not good at it for the life of me. It takes a lot of skill to be good at tennis, and but tennis would be a sport that I would go for.
So now that you're in charge and you've taken control, give us an idea of something you'd like to see changed in tennis, either an on-court competitive rule or some type of policy change.
I would love to see just more, young people, having the access to playing tennis. Tennis is, it requires an actual, having access to a court, racket, training. Obviously, I have aspirations to be a tennis player, but I need a bit of a skills trainer to train me. And it's not like basketball where you could just pick up a ball and go to a court and shoot around, and you eventually kind of get better. With tennis, you require a trainer. So I would say just more access to courts for young people here in the US, but also globally as well. I think there are some sports like soccer and basketball that are very common. I think tennis is just such a great individual sport, and it's the reach is growing. So I would just say more access to courts and opportunities for young people to get involved in the sport early.
Great. Karen, I know you said you're not as much of an athlete, but do you have aspirations to give up Peace Players' life and take over commissionership of a sport?
Well, I mean, commissioner, I don't know if there is a commissioner of this sport, but it's kind of the one sport that I partake in frequently. So maybe we should have establish a federation. So I love stand-up paddleboard and doing yoga on the SUP. So I would like to be the commissioner of, creative ways of using SUP and surfing.
I think that would be fantastic. We had a Stand Up for Cancer group that was using stand-up paddleboarding and as a way to raise money to fight cancer, and they were on our podcast a couple seasons ago, and there's some amazing things. And one of the great things in this space is learning about the work that you're doing. And there's so many organizations using every sport conceivable that we've seen. And so, Karen, Sally, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having us. It's been lovely.
And to all of our listeners and viewers, we want to thank you for taking time to join the Sports Philanthropy podcast. We hope you'll tune in for our next episode. This is your host, Roy Kessel, signing off. Please don't forget to live generously.